there weren't any French players involved at the weekend, but we chatted about French referees to Mike Adamson last week, and there were a few decisions that were maybe questionable this weekend. So, Benji, what did you make of Pascal Gauzere's performance in Cardiff?
Hang on, forget about Pascal Gauzere. Can we first acknowledge the fact that my predictions were absolutely spot on? Right, so I predicted Irish victory 45-10. I think they won, 48-10 or something like that. Yep. So I really wasn't far off. And I was probably the only one in Europe to predict that Wales were going to win this one. Yes, they might have had just a little bit of help with some controversial decisions. But to be honest, we can speak about them. I think, basically there's two main decisions, right? There's the quick tap and go for the first try of, I think it's Josh Adams or Liam Williams in the air. I can't remember who. And then obviously there's the whole Rees-Zammit. Is it forward? Is it not forward? That whole whatever. He catches the ball. It falls off his calf. That is a very tricky one. And obviously Pascal Gauzere being the French ref taking those decisions. So there's two things for me. For one, nothing's personal. It's not Pascal Gauzere or French refereeing or France in general hating Owen Farrell in England and Eddie Jones and wanting to punish them. It's very, very problematic, controversial, edgy decision making, and they want to back their decisions. So I couldn't help but listening that the video ref was Alexandre Ruiz, and I didn't even have to look at the lineup because I could recognize his voice straight away. And for one, when Alexandre Ruiz speaks to Pascal Gauzere in English to analyze a play, I hated it, to be honest, because you can go into more detail in your native tongue, and when it's such tough decision making, they might want to say, yes, for everybody to understand. Okay, but do you want people to understand, or do you want the right decision to be made? So for the knock-on one, I have no clue, to be totally honest. It's really, really tough one to judge. Of course, it doesn't look good, but at the same time, when you really rewind it, I have a feeling that he might be taking it a little bit backwards. It does bounce back. I don't know. That's a tough one. But for the tap and go one, I really do think it's not so much a mistake from Gauzere. It's Elliot Daly walking, so the English winger walking back into position, whereas his other counterpart, Anthony Watson, sprints back in position on the other side, and he covered that angle kick. But it's also Dan Bigger, I think that's him who's on the ball, who eats Pascal Gauzere alive. And so he's pressing in, tell me when I play, tell me when I can play, tell me when I can play, and bang, bang, taps a goal. What I don't like about Pascal Gauzere's attitude is the way that he brushed off Owen Farrell straight after, when, to be honest, you could take just a second to explain it. Not, I told you to speak to your players. The time is on, we played. I think it deserves just a tiny bit more explanation than that. And we're talking fine margins. So, yes, I think both calls were very controversial. I think probably I would have given the quick tap. I would have not given the knock on. That's just my gut feeling. But again, I'm not a ref, and I would be a very, very poor ref. I do think it's nothing personal. It's just maybe the French way of refereeing is a bit more based on attitude and showing who's boss. And that's what he wanted to implement there, and just backing up his decision making.
But then, see, from captaining a Bayonne side, you learn that in the top 14. You learn how to speak to French referees. You learn how you have to communicate, and you have to be really clear. So, for instance, in that situation with Owen Farrell, if I was in his shoes, I would say, Pascal, please let me know when time is back on. It's like this, it's the first thing that I did in top 14. If they ask you to speak to your team, is to pass a message. You understand cumulative penalty pressure. There might be yellow card next. Go and speak to your team. But you have to say, we need to be ready, and we need to have like a warning for when the game goes back in. The fact that they were all in a huddle cluster, not really paying attention, and that wasn't the only time that they looked lackadaisical. For the Elliot Daly mistake as well, like it was schoolboy really. But I think, look, you're right. Dan Bigger absolutely played in 100%, really well played, really cute. But that's part of the game. You play the ref. You if you get a penalty middle of pitch, you send your wingers to either side. If there's something cheap to take, you take it, and you get 7 points on the board. It's just part of rugby. But in terms of working with a referee, like, you'll never make that mistake again, Owen Farrell. But there were loads of schoolboy mistakes. But Owen's got to go back, and he's got to say, okay, I speak to my players, we're in a huddle, but let me know when time is on and let us get set. He made that point after. He said, you have to let us get set, but you have to make clear with the ref, because it's a grey area. You can go, but you've been given the time. But how long is the time? There's no clock. There's no stop clock. So you have to make sure that when that time is up, you're ready to play, and you have relayed that information with the ref. And that's what Owen Farrell didn't do. So for me, as much as it may look like a grey area, England have been played really well by Dan Biggar. I thought hats off. The only sticking point for me was Dan Biggar asked, when can I play? When can I play? Pascal Gauzere doesn't then refer across to any of the England team, hand up, whistle in his mouth, blows, and then says, time on. And I'm like, it was almost like he was going along with the Welsh boy. That was the only bit. I was like, geez, he's really been played, and now he can't go back because time's on. He started the game. He can't change anything. That was it. But I just think for Owen Farrell, like he's an experienced boy. He knows exactly what he should be doing in that situation, and you have to play the ref both ways, when you're in attack or when you're off the ball. The second one for me, Rees-Zammit, I'd never, ever thought that he looked like he was in control of that ball and looked like he knocked it forward off his ass. That was not a try. But then the third one, again, the third try when Johnny Hill, clumsy clear out, tries to take out Ken Owens and the scrum half gives away a penalty under his sticks. Everyone in England thinks, they're going to knock over 3 points. Elliot, that's the first thing a defense coach tells you in every club worth their salt. Any defense coach says, if there's a penalty, you're playing against a scrum half that's quick, naughty, and wants to get go forward for his team. Your eyes are on the prize. Your eyes are on the ball. You're front facing. Elliot Daly was walking towards the post with his head down. You're like, mate, like absolute basics. So for me, yes, there's a lot of unrest on social media and this and that. But ultimately, as Eddie Jones said after the game, England have to look at themselves. And whether that is their attitude on the field or Itoje giving away 5 penalties. But I'm like, mate, you can't get, like, if you give away defensively, if you give away more than 10 points in any game, you're letting a team into the game. So I always felt whenever I was on the pitch, if I gave away 1, I felt embarrassed, or I was letting my teammates down because that was 1/15 of really what we should be allowed to do, which meant that 5 other my teammates had nothing. They didn't have 1 penalty giveaway. But for a bloke, I know he plays on the edge, but to give away 5, you're like, mate, once you've done 2, back in your box. I know you play on the edge, but play on the line, play smart, play aggressive, but you can't give away 5 penalties.
The conclusion to this, listen to the French Rugby podcast. We will explain to you why the refs are so different, why the French are so particular in general, and then you will know.
But you have to be clear with them. That's the point that I want to make. With French refs, obviously second language as well, you have to know exactly where you stand. And that's where captains in Six Nations, you know what you're getting. You know there might be communication issues, so you have to be clear. And look, I've been the first one to be critical of Wales, but if you've got people giving away 5 penalties in your team, you know that after 2 penalties, 3 penalties a stretch, you're probably going to be humiliated in the post-match review on Monday. In most clubs, you'd get a bollocking from your head coach. It's just the way it is. To give away 5, I'm like, mate, you can't live like that. You can't exist at the top level giving away 5 penalties individually. And look, again, the first to have been critical of Wales, but if that match was played again with the same ref and England's attitude and their discipline, Wales would win that game 9 times out of 10. I thought they were outstanding. So well done them.
And clarity would have helped with Pascal Gauzere. But what about Mathieu Raynal and TMO Romain Poit, who both seem to miss Ian Henderson, clearly touching the ball down over the line? Presumably that's just one where, what happened?
I'll let you answer that one. I don't know. I think unfortunately refereeing is very, very tough and everybody makes mistakes, right?
Yeah, but no, mate, like that was a clear try. Like that's what a TMO is for. Romain Poit is one of the leading world refs and he's come on and given it no, like it's a clear cut try. And I have no explanation for that at all, but that's a little bit shambolic for me. And like as much as Pascal Gauzere's could be interpretations and, decisions with communication on the pitch, Ian Henderson for me is cut and dried. That's a try all day long. And I have no idea how they came to that conclusion, but there you go.
And just on the broader point, Benji, because we spoke about it with Mike Adamson last week and I thought he was great about it. You said then that you think French refereeing is a bit average at times. Clearly they're assessed really well by World Rugby and they're given these top games. It wasn't a great weekend for them in terms of those incidents this weekend, but what's your kind of view generally about why they're given these big games and the standard in general?
Wow, that's a bit out of my reach, mate. I know you back me and you rate me, but I have no clue. I have no clue how they get those gigs. To be honest, there must be an explanation that's more than just having that's
it's
more
political.
Than just having the boss man. It's not just having the boss man to be head of. Joël Duge is basically a former international French ref who's now head of the World Rugby refereeing. Yeah, but in 2019 he wasn't. And still the French were the most represented there. I think maybe what they like is basically not the cutting edge, but sort of the cutthroat, the quick decision making. You know, there were constantly problems with refereeing saying too much TMO, too much time loss. You can't, ask for 700 scrums to be repeated. You can't ask for this. You can't ask for that. And again, for Pascal Gauzere, just give him credit. There's been some mistakes, absolutely, but he was harsh on both sides.
And he's a good ref.
So I think basically it's not so much. It's a mix of, yes, there might have been one major mistake that ended up having a big consequence. Okay. But there's also England need to look at their discipline before blaming the ref. It's got nothing to do with French refs not liking England rugby or in general. But it's true that maybe the reason why they get those gigs and the reason why they rate it so highly, I don't think sometimes it's like you would say, Wayne Barnes probably lets too many things happen. But sometimes if you blow the whistle every single time there's a penalty, you never finish a rugby game, right? There's 700 penalties on both sides. So there's a bit of everything to it. But to answer your question, I have no idea how they get those gigs. I have no idea who's assessing what and how. All I know is that there are some good refs in France. Generally, I don't think there's 7 fantastic refs in France. And I don't think the problem of French refereeing is not so much the center ref. It's the fact that the side refs, the touch judge, the TMOs are poor. And that the stress
the amateur as well. I think Mikey was quite polished in his replies last week. I think there's a lot of politics. Obviously, it's still panel selection, and that's how these things work, which is still quite amateurish in how it's run. I think the biggest difference is interpretation. That's the biggest bugbear for Brits that watch French referees, is that when you're used to watching Premiership rugby or top or Pro 14 rugby, their interpretation laws are used differently and applied differently, clearly between top 14 and British rugby. And that's just the taste of French refs versus British refs. But I don't know. I think to have had 5 refs at the World Cup, the last World Cup did really well. And I think they'll be pushed really hard for 2023 as well. But Benji, generally speaking for referees, how frustrated did you get? Like, my biggest one in France was home bias. The pressure of the crowd can get to French refs. Whereas when I found international rugby or in other leagues is less affecting, whereas in France it certainly plays a part. You must have found a lot of home bias as well in the games that you've played, no?
Yeah, massively, because there's a lot of pressure and stuff. But it's not that's not what made me tick. What made me tick is the French referee's attitude. Sometimes you would get some guys who clearly have small man syndrome. You would just want to prove a point, would be overly aggressive. Sometimes not aggressive,
dismissive.
Dismissive in a mean,
shut people down,
shitty way. They would call guys from the first names when you would address them at Mr. Ref, and they would call you on the first name just to say that, they know who you are. They've got this connection that I don't like. And I'm going to shut from there because I already got in trouble once. But there's a certain amount of them who I think let their egos run. And for me, the personality of ref is massive. And that's why I've always liked Nigel Owens, just because he had the balls to basically come out, do this, and still behave the same way. And I still think he's respectful. I still think you can chat to him. He does get angry. He can tell guys to bugger off from time to time. He gives a bollocking, but it's always nice. He can take a joke. Wayne Barnes, you can speak to him. There's a real connection. So he'll make mistakes like everybody else, but at least he's a guy that listens. He's a guy that's got empathy. He's not disrespectful. Some French, not all of them. To be fair, Garcès is very respectful, or was, because now he stopped. But there's a lot of, he could speak good English and stuff. Romain Poit was okay. Pascal Gauzere, that's not so much his issue. But some other guys, he's just, for the sake of it, they'd be like, they were like, tell you off, pointing a finger, and my word.